All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy Macpherson here. Next month, my new program, the Trauma Healing Circle, begins. It's a small group, supportive community for people who've been impacted by trauma, whether you're a therapist or not. And I wanted to talk about the genesis of that today. You know, so much of what I do here around this podcast and my courses and everything really focuses on, I want to say being real, but that sounds so cliche, but authenticity and connecting as a human being, connecting to each other as a human being and valuing that. You know, when I started this podcast, I talk about this a lot. My goal was to, let me go back. When I was in graduate school, I knew I wanted to focus on trauma and be a trauma therapist. I was scared. I was intimidated about, especially talking to young kids, and scared of the crazy stories they might tell me about abuse and so forth. And I learned to work with that, to walk through that in a sense. But when I was in graduate school, I thought the most important thing would be to read as much as I could and to talk to whatever professor I could and go to whatever conference I could and basically cram my head full of knowledge. And I felt that was going to make me the best trauma therapist I could become. And several years later, when I got my first job and I was working with young kids, assessing and treating young individuals who were showing early signs of psychosis, we encountered trauma everywhere, not surprisingly. And that was, my impetus for starting the podcast. And I wanted to initially interview, quote unquote, master trauma therapists, with the goal of, again, helping educate other therapists like myself, inspiring other therapists like myself. And it wasn't quickly. I learned, but I learned that yes, knowledge is crucial. Understanding the neurobiology of trauma is crucial. Being well versed in trauma treatment modalities is vital. But the essential component when you're working with someone is that authenticity on the role of the therapist, of the coach. Vulnerability, being as one of my amazing guests, Manuela Mishka-Reeds, has said, expressing human beingness, being a friggin' human being, being real, allowing oneself, allowing ourselves, allowing myself to be vulnerable. And again, I'm not saying, without any kind of morals, disclose or avoid boundaries and be disrespectful and immoral and unethical in any way. But at the same time, I am saying and challenging myself and you to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to be real, and when you do that, how you do that, that's where the art, right, of therapy comes in. But this doesn't just stop or begin at therapy. It begins in our lives, in our relationships, with all of our relationships. And this is the element that drives me, because it is not always easy for us to do this. It's not easy for me to do this, but it's something that I challenge myself with on a daily basis. When we encounter someone who is authentic, who is present with themselves, with their beingness, with the amazing things of their lives, with the not so amazing things of their lives. We are attracted to that. We are drawn to that because that's where true relationship comes into play, right? That's where we see our humanness, our humanity in that. We don't want to always or ever talk to someone for whom everything's great. Life is great. Everything is perfect. When no one's perfect, right? Our lives are, well, my life isn't perfect. I'm not perfect, certainly. But when we are seen, when we're heard, when our true self is felt and experienced by someone else without judgment, that is nothing short of miraculous. So, a couple months ago, I experienced something that unquestionably was traumatic. I was in shock. I was numb. I found myself dissociating and like while I was driving and like stepping back and looking at myself and thinking, oh my God, is this really happening to me? And I was at a loss for what, WTF, what the hell is going on here? How do I get help, right? And I'm someone who is fairly knowledgeable in trauma. I've interviewed an amazing number of incredible trauma therapists, and I'm privy to a lot of trauma treatment modalities out there. And I found myself thinking, I don't friggin' want a trauma treatment. I want to connect with someone. That's it. I want to connect with someone who is going to be real with me, authentic with me, and present with me. And I don't want any, therapeutic mumbo jumbo. And I just want to be heard and listened to non-judgmentally. That's what I came back to. And that's what I want to do, what I am doing with the Trauma Healing Circle. I want to create a small group, supportive community that meets weekly for people who've been impacted by trauma. When I say small group, I mean 4 people, in addition to myself as a facilitator, for people who've experienced trauma and want to find a space where they can feel safe, they can feel that they're not going to be judged, where they can feel that the other people in the group are just authentic and real, and they're not going to be shooting out, crazy bits of advice and just unsolicited bits of advice, I should say. And this sounds so easy to me in a sense. Well, it sounds simple, but I don't think it's easy. But I think it's undeniably powerful. And this is for therapists or not. You don't have to be a therapist to join us, okay? But I will challenge you and say one of the criteria is that you're willing to be authentic and non-judgmental. And this isn't always easy, right? It's not always easy because for a number of different reasons that I'm not going to go into here, but to be able to create a space like this, for me, to help support other people who've been impacted by trauma is incredibly rewarding. And I want to do that. And if that's you, if you've experienced trauma, whether you're a therapist or not, and you're looking for a place, a supportive community that meets on a weekly basis. I'd love you to join us. Ideally, you would have your own therapist. Okay, this is not going to be therapy per se at all. This is going to be a supportive community where we meet, we hear each other out, we take turns hearing each other out. Again, with people who can understand what's going on, with people who get it, with people who are not going to shy away from expressing what's going on. You know, there's something that happens, I think, when it's interesting. When you're going through pain, right? And you're talking to someone and they're just sitting there and they don't know what to say sometimes, right? But sometimes you get someone who just has a natural response, and that vulnerability and that authenticity, it's just non-judgmental and real, and it's a human response. I think that's very important. Very important. We want to know that we're not alone, right? We want to know we're not the only one who's gone through something. We want to know that we're not the only one who has been in shock or is in shock or is feeling numb. And we want to know that we're not the only one who is sometimes, walking through our days, walking through our lives and kind of dissociating back and looking at ourselves going, what the hell is going on? Supporting each other in this way is crucial. And I think it's a gift when you can find a place where you can do that. And this is my hope for the Trauma Healing Circle. So, I think a lot of people who get into the field of therapy do so for very altruistic reasons. They want to help, they want to heal, they want to help heal, they want to relieve people's pain, they want to take away people's pain, they want to make sure that whatever's happened to them doesn't happen to anyone else. For me, it was, and sometimes it's unconscious, right? It's not so clear for people. For me, it was the feeling that I felt that I could walk into the circle of trauma that's created with a therapist and a client, right? If you imagine those two sitting within a circle, like I felt like I could be there, be with someone's pain and experience, and be present and listen. And yes, there was that bit of wanting to help, quote unquote, or heal, but it's very important for therapists to dial in and get very clear on how they define that. And a lot of times people don't, right? But for me, there's so much power in just being present and being human. Again, as when Manuela Miscarita said, expressing one's human beingness. And what that means to me is being vulnerable. Being vulnerable, means being willing to show those parts of ourselves that a lot of times we don't want people to see. Showing those parts of ourselves that maybe we're not so proud of, that maybe aren't in our eyes so perfect. They're what I call the hills and valleys of our lives, right? Nothing's always perfect. But when we are comfortable in ourselves and allow those parts of ourselves to be seen, right? People acknowledge that. And in turn, it's giving that other person the permission to not only show those sides of themselves too, but to realize that, well, maybe I'm not so broken. Maybe I'm okay after all. And it's okay that this part of me is maybe cracked for now. That's life, right? That's the truth, the authenticity of life. And I know this sounds like a lot, maybe a tall order, but this is what I want to bring to this supportive community, the Trauma Healing Circle. Again, if you feel you're looking for a place where you can come to on a weekly basis to be around others who are also in search of authenticity and themselves being authentic and being present and in a non-judgmental way, I want to invite you to check this out. And you can learn more about it by going to thetraumahealingcircle.com. Very simple, thetraumahealingcircle.com. And that's it. And I will say, if you're listening to this podcast, I want to thank you for being here and supporting me in the work I do and supporting me as a listener. I value you. All right. Have an awesome day.